Hello, everyone, and welcome to Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. We are the Horticulturists here today to answer all your gardening questions and talk about what's happening in our garden. So if you have questions, feel free to start adding those to the comment box today. Our topic of the day this week is succulents, which is definitely a favorite plant I know of Kelly and I's, and I'm sure Ryan loves them too. But we love to talk about these. So if you have questions in particular about succulents, feel free to add them in, and that's what we're going to chat about today. My name is Candice Hart. I'm the State Master Gardener Specialist here for University of Illinois Extension. I'm based here in Bloomington, and I love to talk about annuals, perennials, any type of flowers, and then also kind of houseplants and succulents too. So hit me with those questions. How about Kelly? How about you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Alsop, and I am a horticulture educator for Extension, and I am also based out of Bloomington. And my specialty is integrated pest management. However, I do have a greenhouse background in production and management. So I actually do have a lot of experience with tropicals and succulents. And actually, I remember a day, Candice knows I'm going to bring this up.
Yeah.
When Candice was my intern at the research greenhouse at the U of I, and that we probably did many succulent cuttings together because it was always about rejuvenating the stock in the greenhouse. So I taught her everything she knows, by the way.
It's coming. And how about you, Ryan?
And I'm Ryan Pancall, horticulture educator out of Champaign-Urbana. And my specialty is forestry, agroforestry, arboriculture. So, woody plants, trees and shrubs. That's what I've got formal schooling in and a lot of experience in. I'm also a vegetable gardener, and I'm also, just from past work in restoration and gardening and other things, a native plant lover. So I focus on a lot of native plant topics too. So
awesome. Okay, so like we mentioned, our topic today is succulents. So you can hit us with any questions regarding that or any question at all gardening wise, and we will address that today. But I think we're going to kick it off by talking just a little bit more about succulents in general to get started. So when you hear the term succulent, you might wonder, well, what exactly does that mean? What kind of plants are those? And by definition, succulent just means a plant with fleshy leaves or stems. So in terms of plants, that's a very broad term. So that sedum perennial plant that you have out in your garden that's just about to bloom right now, that would be a succulent. It has fleshy, succulent leaves and stems. But a lot of times when you think of the term succulent, what comes to mind are many of the tropical plants that we tend to grow as houseplants or outside for the winter. And that's what I have handy to show you today are some of those more tropical succulent plants. And these are what you tend to find at the garden center under that succulent category, typically by the house plant. So all of these have fleshy leaves. Now, in terms of general plant care for this group of plants that we call succulents, in general, most of them are going to be sun lovers. They tend to come from desert areas of the United States or other parts of the world. So they tend to prefer kind of a high light situation. And because they're desert plants, they also prefer to be dry. They don't like to be in wet soil for long periods of time. So these are some pots that I pulled off of my deck today. They're pretty wet right now because we had a good rain the other day. But you'll notice that I grow mine in clay pots. And I like clay pots for succulents in particular because the pot can breathe then, and it can dry out a little bit faster than something that grows in a plastic pot. So these sit out on my deck in full sun all summer. Basically, I don't water them almost all summer long. When we get a rain, that's my watering, and then it dries out again. But usually by the time we get another rain, the key with succulents is to not overwater. Okay, so if you have succulents outside or if you have succulents inside, always take your finger, push it into that soil, and if still feels any kind of moist at all still, wait. Don't water yet. Let it dry out completely before you give it a really good water. Let it drain out and then let it dry out until the next time. Make sure it's dry before the next time you water. So that's my biggest tips, is make sure you have plenty of light. So outdoors, I have them in a full sun location. When I bring them inside, I'm going to put them in a southern facing window or western, the brightest light. Okay, so light is key. And then the second is to not overwater. Keep that soil dry, make sure it has good drainage. And like I said, I love clay pots versus plastic pots. So a couple of kind of basic tips to get you started with succulents. Kelly, do you have anything else to?
Yeah, so Candice, we know that succulents tend to like to be root bound.
Mm-hmm.
So you notice that Candice put 3 different types of succulents in a 6, or is that an 8-inch pot?
Yeah, that one might be an 8-inch, yeah.
And so she's putting multiple plants in one pot, and that will keep them happier because they like to stay root bound. If she were to just grow one of those plants, she would probably put it in a 4-inch pot rather than have it be in its own 8-inch or 6-inch pot. Another thing that I love with succulents is the little azalea pots. There's those, what Candice has is a standard, but they're, they're shorter. It's called an azalea pot, and that tends to do really well when growing succulents. However, in my background, I'm growing them in plastic pots because, when you're a plant geek, you just go for whatever pots you can find in the garage.
Right.
But yes, I do prefer that kind of azalea clay pot when it comes to growing, and it has to be multiple.
Yeah.
If it's 4 of the same plants, it's fine, or the different ones. I kind of like the different ones. I know sometimes they compete with each other, but it's easy to pinch a little leaf here and.
Yeah, same here. I'd rather have a very full, lush pot of succulents than one where the plants are really spaced out and you see a lot of the pot. I tend to put them fairly close together too. Just one, because it looks better, but also, like you said,
they like it.
They like it. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I like to group them together. So these came from kind of the table on my deck, and I have a variety of different heights and sizes and different succulents. So it's all kind of works together. You can plant them, put them all close together and have a nice little kind of arrangement of pots all down the table, which is fun.
And that's what we did for our Christmas family activity last year. Was I got, just some standard potting mix and some azalea pots, and then I bought some 3 and 4-inch succulents, and we just made little gardens last year as a family, and it was really fun. They really enjoyed it. The kids went, crazy with the purple rocks, but nice. I loved them. My plot didn't have any purple rocks in it because I'm like Candice. I like the whole plant look.
Yep.
But it was a fun activity.
Love it. Yeah, easy, fun activity. Okay, so if you guys have questions about succulents or anything that's happening in your garden right now, add those to the comment box, and we're going to address them today. I just saw a question come in from Holly. She asked, how many starts per 4-inch pot is suggested? So if you had a 4-inch pot, what would you put in there, Kelly?
Between 3 and 7.
Yeah, and it kind of depends how big your plants are to start with. Like if you're starting with small little 2-inch pots, then I would put a couple in there for sure. Or if you're taking cuttings and putting cuttings in there,
let me show you an example. If this were a cutting, this is donkey's tail, burro's tail. I would put 3 or 5 in there.
Yeah.
This is called Senecio blue chalks. I would put 1. So I kind of want to fill the pot fast. So that's what I tend to do.
Same here. Just to me, the more is better than less, always, to me, for succulents.
I make fun of people who put one succulent cutting in a 4-inch pot.
Yeah. Eventually it'll fill out, but it's going to take quite a while.
And it might struggle a little bit because just go back to the whole, they like to be root bound.
Yeah.
And you look, I have a sansevieria plant in the background, and that plant's been in that pot for 8 years. I have no plans on doing anything to it in the future. The only thing that I would ever possibly do is if I needed it for a propagation lab and do divisions on it or do leaf cuttings on it. But other than that, I'm going to leave that in the pot for the next 10 years.
Yeah. Well, and these clay pots too, I'm going to bring them inside once the temperatures start to get too cool outside. I'm going to bring them inside, leave them as a house plant. And then, I'm probably just going to take them right back outside next year. I'm not going to repot them, just going to let them keep filling out. Yeah.
But the one thing that Candice and I cannot hold ourselves back from doing is taking cuttings. I mean, if you're anything like me, it's like we've grown I have these really beautiful patio planters and house plants. And now I'm looking at the inside of my house and I'm like, there's no way I am going to fit all of these plants inside.
Me too.
So one of the things that I do is I start taking cuttings. I'm passionate about a couple of plants. I love my jungle cacti, and they're like succulents, but they're from the jungle, so they like a little bit more moisture. The pencil cactus, the Christmas cactus is considered a jungle cacti, and so they just grow like crazy during the summer, and then it's time to bring them in. So I'm gonna cut them back or take cuttings. So I already cut back my jungle cacti, and I have some cuttings right here that I've actually put in water. And normally I wouldn't have really gone for this large of a cutting, but I think that this jungle cacti will take this. Plus, not to mention, it doesn't really have a lot of leaves for me to lose water, so it's okay to have a big old cutting like this. And so, just so you know, excuse me, in the earlier in the spring, I took a cutting just like that, and here is what it looks like now. So I'm probably gonna have to give up the mother plant, give it to Candice.
I ain't got room for it.
And she doesn't have room. Give it to Ryan or Aaron. But it just was really fast to take a cutting. But I used water for the jungle cactus. But when it comes to these other cactus that we're talking about, you take the cuttings differently. First of all, this is my donkey's tail right here. So if I'm going to take this cutting, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all these leaves, lower leaves, from the bottom of the stem, like this. And then you see, I've got a bare stem. And if you you can't really see, but where the leaf meets the stem is called a node. Now that is where your roots are going to come from. So you always have to have nodes. And what I'm going to do is something unique to succulents. They require that you have the stems callus over before you stick them into soil. If this were like a coleus, I would stick it in soil immediately. But this is a succulent. So I'm going to allow this to air dry for 1 week before I either dust some rooting hormone on it and then stick it in the soil. And I'm going to use extremely small cutting because I don't want to put them in too big of a pot just yet. I want to grow the cuttings on, and I want to allow the roots of that plant to really fill that cell before I transplant it up into another container. And when I do transplant it up into another container, I'm going to do the whole tightly packed thing. Another really cool thing that succulents do, and you'll notice this, if you ever have a leaf fall off a plant, it'll start actually forming roots. Tell me when it looks good, Candice.
Try turning it to the side. You can see them pretty good.
So you see, this leaf has fallen off the plant, and actually it was on my windowsill. Just sitting there, callousing over, and believe me, it's calloused over for more than a week.
Yeah.
And it started to produce a plant and roots from just a leaf. That doesn't normally happen in the horticulture world. Usually you have to have a tip cutting, a stem cutting. You can't just have a leaf, because these leaves actually have root initials at the base of the leaves. And if you see here, let's see if this will look good in the camera.
There you go.
And you see that little Burrow's tail leaf fell off, and it's starting to form a new plantlet. So they're not going to be as fast as a tip cutting, but it's just such a cool little process. So this one's ready to pot up. I'm probably going to remove it from the mother leaf and just have a little baby plant. So if we think about here, let's demonstrate the nodes one more time. I cut the leaf from the base of the plant, from the stem. This is where my roots are going to come from. So once I've gone through, cut all these off, probably going to cut half.
And you could also then use those leaves to start even more, right?
Yes, absolutely, you can, which is the beauty of succulent. So, but this one, I'm going to let it callus over for a week. I'm going to put it in a 4-inch pot, and this is just going to be, more beautiful faster for me. But I can put these leaves, callus them over a little bit, put them on the top of the soil, but just as long as this part's in contact with the soil, it'll start a new leaf. I wanted to do one more thing, but Candice, why don't we go ahead and go to Ryan?
Well, we've got some questions that have come in kind of regarding this. So talk to me about your favorite potting soil that you would use for this, and then also talk a little bit about rooting hormones and if that's necessary or not for succulents.
As a greenhouse grower, I always use rooting hormone because it provides much more consistency for me. And in the greenhouse, you kind of really need consistency. If I am taking cuttings of 45 kalanchoes, then I need 45 kalanchoes to root all at the same time. And so that really helped me. They don't need rooting hormone. They just benefit. It's faster. The roots form a little bit faster. You get a little bit more root growth. That's up to you. I always do it just because the rooting hormone, you buy a bottle, it lasts forever. So that's me. As far as potting soil is concerned, in the greenhouse, we used specific potting soil for succulents and cacti, but I don't do that in my personal life. The reason I don't do that is because any really good quality soilless mix is going to do well. You don't have to have the specific, I've always been like the orchid mix or the succulent mix or the mix for this type of plant. Not really, don't have to have that to be successful at growing plants. So I just always use a high quality mix. This is what I tell people. Go to the greenhouse that you love, the garden center that you love, and ask them what soil they grow in and buy that, because they're the experts. And they probably use that soil for a multitude of different types of plants. So, I mean, I'm not going to just go to, any store and buy soil. I want to buy what they're growing in. And they always have some kind of professional mix that they want their customers to use.
Yeah. And any professional potting mix should be well drained enough to grow these plants fine, as long as you're not overwatering. That's the key. Now, what you're going to find in any of those pre-made cacti or succulent mixes is typically there's either coarse sand or some type of coarser material mix in. And I've used those. I've made my own by adding extra perlite and things like that. And honestly, like you said, I don't notice a huge difference either way, but I also definitely don't overwater. If anything, I underwater. If you feel like you're prone to overwatering, don't do that, first off. But yeah, then you might think about maybe having a coarser, more sandier mix. But yeah, you're right. If you're watering right, like all of these clay pots are just in the same good potting soil I did all my other containers in, and they did great. So.
And so the topsoil or the garden soil, the cheaper stuff that, is perfectly fine for your garden is not good for a pot. You have to do that high quality soilless medium.
Yeah. And so Holly asked, peat with sand. She said, I make my own mix. So how would I build it? Yeah. The times I've mixed it on my own, I'll do a mixture of peat moss and coarse sand, not just like playground sand. You want a specific horticultural coarse sand. Or I've also done it with perlite, those white parts that you see in your potting mix, that's perlite. I've also added extra of that to it as well. So there's a couple ways to do it.
Do you do a 50-50?
Yeah, I have typically. Yeah. That's a great question. Okay, we had one other question here about propagation. Denise says she's tried to propagate crassula, so jade leaves, numerous times. I lay the leaf on the container filled with potting mix. After a short period of time, the baby starts to grow, the daughter plant, and the mother leaf always seems to dry out and die before the baby really takes hold. As a result, the baby then dies. What am I doing wrong? I'm pretty sure I'm not overwatering because I tend to underwater. So jade leaves forming the baby plant.
What do you think? Maybe when she removes the mother leaf, maybe she should put a little more soil around that baby so it's nice and planted.
Possibly, yeah.
Sometimes when you lay it on top of the soil, the roots kind of go a little aerial and not really in the soil. But, and two, another thing is, leaf cutting is not as consistent as tip cuttings. In the greenhouse, when Candice and I would take cuttings, like all of our tip cuttings would take, but maybe 60% of our leaf cuttings would take. So that could be another factor.
And I think, and Holly just asked this, she asked, if I root a leaf, how long before I can put it in pots to sell it as a 1-inch? If you're taking a leaf cutting, it takes a long time for that baby plant to form something big enough to sell or use. If at all possible, a tip cutting is going to get you there way quicker. So for that jade plant, if you have a big enough jade plant that you're able to take tip cuttings versus just leaf cuttings, do that for sure. You're going to get a much sizable, bigger plant in a much faster rate.
I mean, the reason that Candice and I did it in the research greenhouse was for demonstration purposes. We wanted to show students, hey, this is what happens. And so, in production, I don't think that, first of all, in production, we don't do a lot of cuttings. We usually just buy in rooted or calloused over cuttings. But for Candice and I, we always had students walking through, and that was a really great way to educate them on that. So that's why we did it. I don't think we were doing it to get a lot of new cuttings.
Then we also had a greenhouse too.
Yes.
If you're doing this at home and you don't have a greenhouse, or you don't have a really great sunny window that you can leave a pot in for a year, it's gonna take a while. We had the luxury of a greenhouse. Yeah. So Holly wanted to know, so what do you think, from a leaf cutting to a 1-inch pot in a greenhouse, 3 months, 6 months? What do you think, Kelly?
Hard question.
I know.
It all depends.
I'm thinking at least
over 6 months.
I say at least 6, if not a year, depending on the type of the growth habit of it.
But a tip cutting could be 4 weeks.
Yeah, I was gonna say a month. As soon as there's roots going in that pot, you can go with it at that point. Yeah. Well, hopefully that helps, Holly. Let me scroll back up. This is a great segue to Ryan. Holly asked earlier, which succulents survive outdoors over winter in Illinois? So we've been showing all kind of tropical succulents so far today, but I know both of us have some perennial succulents that are native in the garden. And I think you had some pictures to show on some of those, Ryan.
Yeah, well, I was just going to talk about one particular native species. And here, let me share my screen real quick. Let's see. I think you all should be a PowerPoint slide there. Let me know when you guys can see what I'm showing here.
Yep.
But this is a close picture of prickly pear cactus, and this is a native to Illinois. I've got in the upper right-hand corner there a little map, and I hope our video thumbnails aren't kind of covering that. That's how it appears on my screen. But native kind of throughout Illinois. I'm most familiar with it in southern Illinois, kind of on a rocky cliff top ecosystem. And actually, the day I got this picture, I think both of you two were with me. We had an educator in service window, led us on a hike through some cliff ecosystems, some cliff tops. So you can see where this picture is taken, that there's some rockiness in the background. There's some moss and lichens growing. So it's a super dry, super sunny, exposed spot where this plant likes to grow a lot of times in nature. Of course, it's native. It's hardy outdoors. And so, but this is one that actually does well in propagation. And if you were to look around for this, I've never actually found it in a garden center that I was in, but you can buy seeds and you can buy the pads or, cuttings of this to propagate at home. And so I've always got pads of this cactus from other folks that grew it that could give me some. And so recently we were visiting with family, and a family member has a big giant prickly pear cactus and gave my mother-in-law and I some cuttings off of it. So this is just a few details on how we propagate it. And just in general, propagation is best done with the pads. With the seeds, it's super duper slow, just kind of like you guys have talked about with leaf cuttings, just super duper slow and takes multiple years to even get a flowering plant. So you can see we had some pretty big pads we took here. And I'm sorry, I don't have them a picture of those as we set them up to kind of dry out. This was the box I brought mine home in. So the biggest thing I would caution everybody on is to use thick gloves. And you can see we have some modified tongs there that my mother-in-law put together with, some nice tape on there to protect the pad. And gosh, I'd say if you could not ever touch them with gloved hands, that would be the best, because any of us that have touched them with our hands have got a thorn one way or another, and not a big deal. It's just like any other, splinter or something you get in your skin, but just something to be aware of. But just some kind of general rules of thumb, select pads that are 6 months or older. So you want a little more mature, older of a pad, and allow that pad to sit upright and calloused. You don't want it to be laying on a side like I kind of have these in the box, because they can tend to curl and kind of deform a little bit while they callus. But safe to say, it usually takes about a week or two for that callus to form. And if it's cooler, like I've done it in the springtime before, when we have some pretty cool wet weather, it may take a little longer. But I tried to get a pretty good picture of the end of one of these where you can see the callus tissue there. And how it differs is when you cut this thing off the plant, it's green and fleshy there. It's almost moist looking there. And now you can see that tip of that cactus pad is, it's dry, it's crusty, it's got that callus tissue there. So then what we did is you'd want to plant these in, a full sun location, about an inch deep in the soil. Start. So like as Kelly talked about, really blood callus is important on all these succulents because you'll start to have some of that root rot develop if you don't let enough callus form. So plant them in, about full sun, about an inch deep. If it's a really sunny, stressful site for these guys, one recommendation is to orient that pad in a north-south direction. So the flat side of it kind of points east and west, and it's not going to collect as much sun. It's not going to stress it out as much. I can't say that where we've transplanted these, I've paid a lot of attention to that, but on my next slide, I'll show a couple different spots that we considered planting and talk about that a little bit more. But if you need to, just to not plant it, sometimes like this larger cactus pad there, like system of 3 or 4 pads, is going to take a little bit of support to only stick an inch into the ground and stick up. I found that propping it up with rocks or a brick, that's a great thing to let these kind of roots establish and leave that in place for a little while those roots establish. The recommendation is to not water these, just like all these other succulents we've talked about today. They don't take a lot of water, so you really have to hold back and just absolutely don't water for the first month or so while you're letting those roots kind of form. And then after that, probably could add some water during dry times, but really this is a plant that where I've got it established in any of my garden spaces, I've not had to water, it's just kind of hung out. And I mean, you may be surprised at once these get established, how quickly they multiply. And the particular plant we took these cuttings off of was getting overly large. So that was some of the reason why, cuttings were readily available to us. So my next slide here is kind of one spot that we did plant these in. This is actually at my mother-in-law's house in her backyard in the upper right there. Away from a foot traffic is where she chose to plant this, kind of in the forested edge. You can see a little bit of forest edge behind it, but it still would be a full sun location where I haven't actually planted mine yet. I'm guilty of not putting mine in the ground yet. That's my little box of cactus pads there you saw, but in the lower left is where I plan to plant mine. And it's just a bare spot along a sidewalk in one of our garden beds. There's kind of some herbs in the background there, and off to the right is kind of a pollinator garden. The downfall of planting right there is that someone can step on these. So, that my wife was quick to point that out. Like, that is the stupidest spot to plant these, because not only were kids and adults walking through there, I have a super old dog that's like 15 years old, and he likes to wander through that bed, and I can see him stepping right on that cactus. So I'm still trying to find that perfect spot. I think I have a spot on the front side of my house where I'm going to do that in full sun, but think about that. That was one of the things I didn't even think about, the fact that you could plant these somewhere where someone could step on them. So in Southern Illinois, where we established these, it was in actually a raised bed that was along the side of our house that was, almost waist high, so there was no risk of anybody stepping on it. I hadn't even thought of the stepping factor. So anyway, pretty easy to propagate at home, pretty easy to keep going as long as you have full sun and kind of well-drained soil. If you have a poorly drained spot, of course, it's going to stay a little too wet. So, but anyway, that's kind of the basics of propagating prickly pear, all kind of in my screen share here. But happy to answer any questions, at least in the terms of, context of my experience in doing this. I think we've done about 3 different plantings in my gardening career at this point.
Nice. Yeah, I have some in one of my garden beds. It's surrounded by driveway on all sides. So it's a nice kind of dry, perfect spot for these. And I think I inherited mine from a master gardener plant sale. It was left over, because you're right. You don't see these available too often in a garden center for sale. You almost have to get a cutting from a friend or a neighbor and get it going.
Yeah, and for somebody that has that well-established plant, they've got lots of pads to give, it's usually not a difficult ask to get a little bit of this cactus once it's going and kind of taking up that space. But yeah, I thought that sidewalk location would be really good, kind of like your driveway location where we've got this hot concrete kind of keeping it all really dry. And if you saw, we had a little bit of a brick edging there that I just thought, that screams cactus to me, but we're going to have to find a different spot that's out of the way of foot traffic.
Yeah, totally. I love it when it's in flower too. Those yellow flowers are just so gorgeous when it is in flower.
When does it flower?
I'm trying to think what. Is it like
kind of springtime?
I was thinking like late
June.
May, June, maybe. I took a picture of it. I'd have to look back through but yeah, I think it's about that time. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, hit us with your succulent questions or any other gardening questions, and we'll address those today. Holly did ask earlier, are rosebud succulents a real thing? And I Googled it quick while Ryan was talking about that. And indeed, they are. It's a species of Aeonium, which is one of my favorite groups of succulents. There's a very dark, almost black Aeonium that's one of my favorites. But yeah, it's an Aeonium species. Now, I don't know, you'd have to probably do some searching to find it, but it really does look like a rose head. It's a unique shape for a succulent. So it exists, Holly. You'll just have to do some searching, I think. Okay, I think we are caught up on questions. So if you have any, feel free to ask. But would
you like me to talk about the sansevieria?
Oh yeah, let's do that because that's a common plant people have around.
I actually call it the bedroom plant because to break down the botanical way of how succulents release oxygen. Usually a normal plant will stop releasing oxygen at night because it's no longer photosynthesizing. But a succulent tends to keep that process going. I'm trying to say basically, and Ryan and Candice, you can help me if you want. But they also release the oxygen at night because they're still breaking down food during the night period. Mm-hmm. And so that's why they call it the bedroom plant, because you put sansevieria in your bedroom and you're getting that oxygen release throughout the entire night. Now, I did a little bit of studying on that particular point. You kind of have to have like 6 sansevierias to really get the good effects of the added oxygen. But it could be, a very beautiful, bedroom display. And they're so easy to take care of that you probably wouldn't, even though she said they like sun, they're one of those plants that will take a little bit less sun. But if I were to propagate the one behind me to get fast cuttings, I would do division. I would just cut them apart, and I'd have to use a saw to do that. But they also will do leaf cuttings. And so I have a leaf like this. Here's my leaf. And so it doesn't even fit the screen.
Big leaf.
So what you do is, this is how I take leaf cuttings. Now you can, cut it off like this. Let it callus over for 7 days. Stick that end in soil. But what I do with this is so you have to make sure you're always orienting up, because if you put it in the bottom side, it won't do it. So, but what I do is I'll sit there and I'll cut the whole leaf into pieces. And then I'll put it in a jar of water, and I'll let the water go up to like right here, and it'll start forming plantlets and roots. Mm-hmm. And it's a longer process, but that's what I've done most of the time. I think the putting things in water to propagate them came from before I knew what propagation even meant. Because when I first got into horticulture, I just started propagating, and I'd put things in water and roots would come out. I didn't even know the science behind it.
Magic.
And so.
Well, it's
Go ahead.
What's really forced the roots grow is, I think that's why I've done it a lot of times, just to like sit there and be able to see and like watch it over the weeks, or the week or however long you're putting it in there. So that's kind of what I like about like a clear, I usually put it in like a clear glass container with water so I can sit there and watch it. But
yeah. And when you And once you have roots then, Kelly, when you go to pot those up, are you going to group multiple of those together in one pot for something like a sansevieria like that?
Yeah, and eventually I'd want to remove the mother leaf from the plantlet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, yeah, sansevieria likes to be pot bound. So
very cool.
If you want those 6 plants or 16 plants in your bedroom, and you don't want to spend the money and you're willing to wait a little time, this could be a way you get 6 or 16 plants in your bedroom.
There you go. And like,
well, and that, you know, that's really been one of the best performing house plants. I mean, it's like the hardest to kill. Like we've got it in multiple like shady spots around our house that I just really like it as a house plant because it's just so easy and you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, super tough.
No plant damage. Like you don't have like dying leaves that look bad. You don't have wilting. It's just like, I mean, seriously, like Candice says, I mean, succulents kind of thrive on neglect.
Mm-hmm. That's why they're my favorite.
It's when you overlove them that it's not good.
Yeah. I've started doing pretty much any of my containers that like outside. I have some in front of my garages. If it's full sun, I'm filling those babies with succulents every summer because I don't almost ever water them with the hose because they get a little bit from rain every once in a while and that's it. So if I have a full sun spot nowadays, I'm skipping the petunias, I'm skipping all that stuff and going with succulents, and I love it. It's just super low maintenance.
I have actually been to Candice's home, and she also does succulents in her window boxes, and true. It is gorgeous.
Yeah. Any of my window boxes that face a sunny side of the house, the one I just filled with multiple types of sedums this year, and they're all perennial sedums, so I'm going to keep them in there and just kind of see what happens. If any of them come back next year, then great. If they don't, then that's okay too. But yeah, I've watered that almost none this whole season. It's amazing.
Well, during the pandemic, of course, when we were all sent home from the office, the first thing I was like, what about my plants? Because my office is clearly full of plants. And so one of the things, the secretary came in and watered the plants every now and then because she was the only one that was really allowed in the office. And then once I was allowed back to visit the office, I found a huge mealybug outbreak in all of my succulents, and well, not all of them, but the majority of them. And I caught, it's like, this is the year, it's year of the gardener, but it's the year of the apocalyptic office plant garden. Because they all kind of like, it's like, you can't care about the plants. They all kind of died away.
Yeah.
But rather than treat the mealybugs, you guys are going to hate this. You know what I did, Candice, right?
You got rid of them.
I got rid of them.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I would do. Because once those guys are established and they're in that's so hard to get rid of.
People want to, how do I get rid of mealybug for my succulents? How do I do it? And I'm just like, I mean, unless you treat it with a harsh chemical, you are going to be treating forever. The best thing to do is throw it away and go buy another plant.
Start fresh.
But that's what Candice and I did in the greenhouse all the time. I love it when people walk into the greenhouse. They're like, you really have insects here? I'm like, are you kidding? Insects everywhere. But if we would walk up to a plant and it was really bad mealybugs or scale, it was gone. We were not going to put the effort into clearing that out. Now, I understand that to us, that plant didn't mean a lot, and a lot of the house plants really have a lot of personal meaning to them. So when it comes to mealybugs, you have to get that systemic, I'm saying imidacloprid, but is anybody going to know what I mean? That just a systemic granular that you put on your soil
Mhm.
that might help a little bit, but it's still going to be a battle.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times tossing it and starting fresh is the way to go. It hurts, but sometimes that's it's the way to go.
Ryan, have you ever thrown out a plant infested?
Oh yeah. I mean, I guess I can't. I only have a few plants that like really have all that much sentimental value, to be honest. That like because probably whenever back in college, I have some from like grad school days. Those plants. Gosh, I don't know what I would do if those got infected. I'd probably treat them with everything on the planet. But I'd say like there's probably just kind of a rotation and mix of houseplants around our house. I mean, I bet we have 50 or more houseplants throughout the house. And it's just, I guess I haven't had a lot of real bad infestations in my current house. But yeah, I think I'm with you that there's a time and a place to just call it quits and cut your losses and get rid of the plant as opposed to deal with treating it. So yeah, definitely tossed a few.
Okay, I think we've had a few questions come in. Roberta asked earlier, I think this is when you were talking about prickly pear, do deer eat the cactus?
Man, I don't know. Well, they produce a fruit, that it's edible to humans too, that, is there after the flower goes away.
Mm-hmm.
So I would assume probably some native fauna would eat the fruit, but I don't know about the actual cactus pet. I'm guessing no. I'm guessing that's why it's probably done well here.
Yeah,
It looks like Kelly might have a resource.
I just got the new, I might butcher her name, but Tracy DeSabato Ost. She's done the well-tended perennial garden, and this is the new update that she does. And so she is just a plantsman in her heart. And so one of the things I absolutely love about this book is all these lists that she has at the back. So like, for instance, this page, she goes, perennials that require division every 1 to 3 years. And then she lists them out. Perennials that require division every 4 to 5 years. I mean, you can't find that kind of resource. I mean, yes, Candice, Ryan, and I use our instincts, and gardeners use their instincts, but it's just a really cool, they're like, one list is perennials to deadhead to prolonged blooming. But perennials that reseed.
Nice. And
Perennials with self-cleaning flowers. It is just such a cool reference book. And so I'm thinking there's probably something in here that says perennials that, let me look it up and you guys can talk while I'm looking. Perennials that will withstand deer browsing or deer don't like.
Yeah. My guess is that they would learn pretty quickly that prickly pear is not something they should be eating with those spines on it. So my guess is it's probably not. Okay, it looks like we lost Ryan, so let's see if he pops back on. Kelly, while you're looking, let's see, we've got a question from Kim. Is ZZ plant considered a succulent? If so, can you discuss propagation and whether to cut off the fleshy stubs that are left when a stem dies? I love ZZ, and I know you do too.
Okay. ZZ plant is not a succulent, it is a tropical.
And I will show you what ZZ looks like.
Yeah, I could show you too. I got one in the office.
ZZ.
Let me tell you, you've never grown a houseplant before. Brian was talking about how sansevieria is easy. ZZ plant is easier.
Yeah.
You can't take leaf cuttings, you can't take tip cuttings. That's why they're so expensive in the garden center. They're really propagated by division. Yet, and I've been successful in dividing them, and then they'll come out of it, and in 3 or 4 months they'll look really good again. But that is why they're so expensive in the stores, that we can't do cuttings or leaf cuttings, we have to propagate them by division.
Yeah.
But talk about the easiest houseplant in the world.
Yeah.
And it almost looks fake. It has like no plant damage. And yes, I know the ZZ plant, every now and then you see the leaves brown or they don't look so good. You just cut them off. The stubs that you leave behind, I just cut them off and leave them. Eventually there'll be new leaves that cover up that.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Candice.
That's one of my favorites too. Super, super good. Try dividing it if you can, or you may just have to purchase another one if you're looking for more.
And yeah, when I did an office greening project as soon as we got our new office. We've been in our office, I don't know how long, but it was like newly painted. And so I was like, we need plants. And so my boss was like, go ahead, you can get some plants for the different offices. And so ZZ plant has by far been the most successful, because let me tell you, my office mates, they don't take care of their plants the way I do.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's cool to set them up for success with a really easy to grow plant.
Yeah, and they don't all have a nice bay of windows like you do either. They don't have probably as much light.
That's what you get for being the horticulture educator. You get the office with the bay of windows.
Lucky you. Okay, Ryan, you're back. Let's see. I have a question from Mary earlier. Fuchsia in a large pot outside. She lives in Chicago. Can I put it in the ground now, or does it have to go inside? If inside, how do I do it? So yeah, Mary, fuchsia is a great shade annual, but it is an annual. So if you're wanting to keep it going, you would need to bring it inside and treat it as a houseplant if you wanted to. Or what Kelly and I talk about a lot of times is you could take cuttings of that plant and propagate it and bring those inside. So you had a smaller kind of plant to deal with. But yes, if you are wanting to keep that fuchsia going, you would either need to take cuttings and bring those inside or bring the whole plant inside. It is an annual. Great question. And let's see, someone asked the name of the book. So we've got that in the comments. So definitely
it's a wonder if you're a perennial gardener. Candice probably has this, but she probably has the old edition.
I do. I don't have the new one.
I have the new edition.
Lucky.
It was like, oh, I haven't made it. And it's just like really great information. I'm not finding anything in here.
No, I'm sure there's something in there.
I'm gonna keep looking.
Yeah. Let's see. Leslie asked, can you spell the plant name you keep talking about? Let's see. We were just talking about ZZ plant, right? That's simply just the letter ZZ plant. That's the common name. Were we talking about another one before then?
The sansevieria?
Oh yeah, sansevieria. We can get that added in the comments.
Also called mother-in-law's tongue.
I was just say that. Type in mother-in-law's tongue, it'll pop right up. There's a lot of those. Okay, I think we are caught up. We have about 5 minutes left. So if you have any lingering questions about succulents or about anything gardening related this week, add those into the comment box. Anything else, Kelly or Ryan, you want to touch on with succulents for everybody?
I'm still looking up the deer question. I found the deer-resistant perennial, but Optunia is not in there.
Oh,
maybe that's a perennial she doesn't talk about.
That could be. It's not a super common perennial, so.
Yeah. I mean, maybe, how could you really write a book on every single perennial? I mean, it would be, I wouldn't be able to carry it.
Yeah. I don't remember where is she located too.
I think it's Michigan. Let me look.
So it's similar Midwest. That's good.
Let me see.
Okay. Well, I would say to finish out, maybe let's talk about like kind of bringing these plants indoors? Because I know here in Bloomington, it's definitely starting to cool down. The nights are getting colder, down into the 50s. So I'm definitely going to start to be thinking about bringing in any of the tropical plants I have outside. So all of these succulents that are on my deck. I have some house plants out on the front porch that need to come in. So you want to talk a little bit about kind of the process of that? And I know a lot of people ask, how do I make sure there aren't bugs on them when I bring them inside, or insects? Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, when I couldn't have been a more perfect topic for me, because I was a greenhouse grower. When I was in a greenhouse grower, it was like anything below 55 degrees was not optimal. Doesn't mean it's going to kill them. It's just they're not going to thrive. So now that we're starting to get lower in the night, I would start thinking about it. Now, and though it's the middle of September, I'll probably wait 2 or 3 more weeks.
Yeah.
Before I actually start bringing them in. And it's kind of like the reverse process of bringing them out. Which, you know, if it freezes that night, believe me, you're taking them all inside. You're not going to do any acclimation of plants. But, you know, you might have, like Candice might put that plant that's in full sun, she might, you know, put it in underneath her porch for a couple days before she really brings it in, to get it sort of acclimated to a lower light environment, because she's never gonna be, unless she has like major fluorescent lights in her house, she's never gonna provide it what it had outside.
Yeah.
And yes, it's time to start really looking for the insects. They might be there. You can do treatments for them before you come in. Some people do insecticidal soap as just a general standard treatment on everything before they come in. However, be careful with monopods. They don't do well with insecticidal soaps. And some of these succulents probably wouldn't do very well with insecticidal soaps too. It'd probably burn them. So,
yeah, I tend to just bring mine in the garage first.
yeah.
And let them sit in there a couple days and hope that if there's spiders, if there's whatever, that they'll, and I tend to just give them a good shower to spray everything down with the hose really good, and then obviously let them dry out. But yeah, I think that's the big thing.
And I'll cut things back a little bit just because it's, you know, it's hard for it to sustain that growth in a lower light situation.
Yeah. Okay, we had, I think, 2 or 3 final questions, so we'll end off with those. Peggy asked, as a beginner, which one succulent would you start with in a sunny window? What would be the one that you would start with, Kelly?
Me?
Would you recommend someone start with?
The sansevieria as a beginner. I mean, Ryan hit it on the head. You can't really go too wrong with a sansevieria. Mm-hmm. And they're fairly cheap. I mean, compared to a ZZ plant, you get a little tiny ZZ plant in a 6-inch pot for $30. You can get a big old sansevieria for $30. I'm passionate about jungle cacti. The pencil cacti, now Candice has that also. I love this plant. Yeah. It is one of my favorites. Candice also has the other jungle cacti that I like. It's called the dancing bone cacti. Candice, can you show it?
These?
No, go up.
Go up? Oh, sorry. Oh, these.
That right there.
I just forget what these are called.
Just super fun. Now, the one she has behind the dancing bone cacti is called Echeveria. And I think that one is a little bit harder to grow because it tends to outgrow it. Once it flowers, it wants to die after that. So another thing is aloe. Aloe is super fun and cool to grow, and there's so many different kinds out there.
I said one, Kelly.
There's yellow. Now, come on, you guys. Look at those colors. When I saw this plant, I freaked out and I was like, I have to have it. It's just so beautiful and easy to grow.
Aloe is going to be my suggestion too, because it's just super easy. Okay, let me see if we can squeeze in these last couple. Peggy asks, how often do you water indoor succulents? Peggy, no, you can't have a schedule because it's going to vary. Stick your finger. If you feel any moisture in that soil, don't water yet. I would say when I bring them indoors, no more than probably like once a month at that. Okay, but again, you can't have a schedule. Check the soil moisture.
I don't stick my finger in the top of the pot. I stick my finger in the bottom of the pot.
That too. Where
any moisture, not watering.
Yeah. Wait. Rhea asks, I have a container hibiscus. It's about 5 feet tall. Can I take cuttings to overwinter it? Yup, you can. Take those tip cuttings, bring it inside.
For that, I would do the same thing. I would remove the lower leaves. I would actually cut the leaves that you remain in half because it's going to suffer because it doesn't have roots.
Yeah.
I would put it in a little pot, a 4-inch pot, something like this, a little 4-inch pot. Make sure those nodes go below the soil, and you can keep growing that and not have to sustain a big plant.
There you go. And do a couple of them just in case one of them doesn't take. Okay, and then lastly, for you veggie growers, have you grown, I think it should be zucchini rampicante? She asked, does it taste as good if they let it stay on the vine as a winter squash? Do you have to leave it on the vine to save the seeds? Either of you familiar with that species?
Sorry.
Zucchini rampicante. We'll have to do some research on that one, Leslie. Okay, and then we have one final one, and I'll let Kelly take this one, and this will be our last one. Kathy asked, a container with succulents has white fuzzies on it, especially at the stem joints. What is it? How do I treat it?
It's mealybug.
Yep.
And it is a very hard insect to take into control. Again, I talked earlier about there's this granular that's a systemic that actually is taken up into the plant that does do okay on mealybugs. Another thing you can do is wash them off and do the whole Q-tips with the alcohol. But what I find is that if it's a really heavily infested with mealybugs, they're in the roots, they're in the soil. If you are willing to throw it away, I say throw it away. If it's not a huge infestation, you could do a treatment, but just know one treatment and one strategy is not going to work. It has to be an integrated approach, meaning you might have to wash it off several times. You might have to use the alcohol and Q-tip. You might have to use the systemic pesticide. You might have to think about changing your temperature in the greenhouse. Sometimes Candice and I, even though we'd want to grow a particular house at 75 degrees, if we turned the degrees down a little bit, it would slow the insect development. Now, I know that's intense. You're not going to do that to your house, but that's where I get the whole integrated approach.
Okay.
Or you could throw it out and support the industry and buy a new plant.
Very true. That's probably what we would do.
Yeah. They're hoping you get mealybugs, so you go buy a new plant.
Right? Yeah. Well, awesome questions today, everybody. I hope you learned a little bit more about succulents and any of the other topics we touched on today. Our next show is going to be on September 23rd. So in 2 weeks, you can hop back on with us, and we're going to be talking about planting bulbs. In particular, talking about bulbs that are great for bees and pollinators. So join us on the 23rd. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the week and get out there and garden while we still can. Thanks, everybody.